Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Bible Study with the Warehouse Church. I'm Pastor Sherman Bradley here, co-pastor here with my lovely wife, Pastor Sadell Bradley, and tonight we are in our Bible study series on good church culture. Good church culture. And tonight we're going to discuss non-toxic leadership. Non-toxic leadership. Leadership guru Peter Drucker once said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And that is true in business, and it's also, unfortunately, true for the church. No matter how awesome your vision, plan, and strategy might be, if your church's culture, its attitude, and behavioral characteristics are not good, there are problems. Last week, we talked about the criticism that the church is receiving these days from both inside and outside of its ranks, and about some characteristics of good church culture, like multi-ethnicity, unity, holiness, the forsaking of worldly philosophies and ideologies, and following the teachings of Jesus Christ, including love, forgiveness, and biblical reconciliation. We are products of our cultural environment in which we were raised. Let that sink in for a second. We have to take a look back at what we were exposed to. Now, culture, we learn it, we practice it, and we pass it on to others. Today, we're going to explore whether our churches are toxic or non-toxic. Now, toxic means poisonous, relating to or caused by poison. Now, figuratively, it means very harmful or unpleasant in a persuasive or insidious way. Greek soldiers would put poison on the tips of their arrows, and as they would draw them back and shoot them, you can only imagine what that would do in battle to an enemy. Now, theologian Scott McKnight, he compares the qualities of toxic and non-toxic church cultures. That is his passion. That's a work and research that he has been doing. And here's a quote directly from him in one of his books. It says, "Toxic, flesh-driven cultures breed a lust for power, success, celebrity, control through fear, and emphasis on authority and demands for loyalty." These values may be not explicitly stated, or maybe not even outwardly recognized, but as they fester in the heart of a leader, they can't help but bear bitter fruit, damaging the culture of the church and seeking to destroy anyone who gets in the way. Powerful statement. Toxic, flesh-driven cultures breed lust for power, success, celebrity, control through fear. And there's an emphasis on authority and demands to be loyal. Now, a spirit-formed, Christ-like culture, on the other hand, nurtures truth, offers healing for the wounded, seeks opportunities to show redemptive grace and love, and focuses on serving others rather than being served. Serving others rather than being served. And you can look at some of how relationships are happening inside of leadership in circles where there's an overemphasis of serving the man rather than an overemphasis of the man serving the people. One of the other important points, and one very important to me and my passion, is also a Christ-like culture looks for ways to establish justice in the daily paths of life. Establish justice in the daily paths of life, in your daily walk, in your daily interactions, to have justice at the top of your mind. So a Christ-like church culture always has its eyes on people, because a mission of the church is all about God's redemptive love for people. God's redemptive love for people must be at the top. Now, we hear this in Luke 61, verses 1 through 3. Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 3, and Luke 4, 18 through 19. They discuss the ministry of the Messiah and his church, which includes proclaiming the good news to the poor, liberating the bruised, mending the brokenhearted, comforting those who mourn, recovery of sight for the blind, setting the oppressed free, and proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. It also encompasses rebuilding and restoring waste places and desolate cities, and bringing generational healing. Generational healing. These all require Christ-like leadership. Now, in Matthew 11 and 28, Jesus says, "Learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." And that is the posture of a good leader. That is the posture of a leader of the body of Christ. Now, sadly, we've experienced ungodly leaders who exhibit two broken, toxic traits that we're going to discuss right now. Unfortunately, we've had some exposure to this, far too much exposure to this. You may even be dealing with this right now. Number one is narcissism, a term that has taken prominence in, let's just say, the last several years, 4, 5, 6. We've been exposed to narcissism, some might say in new ways. Narcissist in Greek mythology was known for loving his own beauty. He loved it so much that when he first saw it, his reflection in a river, he was so entranced and then so entrenched and marveling at his own beauty that he never took his eyes off the water. He never took his eyes off of his glare, and he literally died there, gazing into his own reflection. Narcissists. They are marked by grandiosity, an excessive need for attention and admiration. They are selfish, and they have troubled relationships and are often unable to empathize, unable to step out of themselves and into the position of another without their own lens on for how they see it or how they would respond to it, literally stepping fully out of one's own self and into another to be with them is what empathy is. Far too often, unfortunately, leadership seems to attract narcissists. Whether narcissists find or scheme their way into a position at the top, which is partly true, or the top of leadership ladders simply attract narcissists, which also is partly true. Far too many churches, far too many organizations are led by narcissists, and they are overwhelmingly male. Selah. Let that sink in for a moment. So narcissists are people who care only about themselves, what they look like, and what other people think about them. It is easy to label someone a narcissist. But why is being a narcissist dangerous? Very important question. Because behind the mask of extreme confidence lies a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable, especially to the slightest bit of criticism. Take King Saul, Israel's first king, as our example. The children of Israel desperately wanted a king like all the other nations, which is problem number one. This notion of comparison is prevalent. How many people do we have? How much ministry do we do? How much money do we have? How visible are we? How is our online platform in comparison to somebody else? Rather than we are incorporating these measures because it's what's going to allow us to be most effective in the community that we have been called to serve. So God was offended by them not being satisfied with his leadership, but agreed to let them have what they want. Now, this is a very important point we won't belabor, but think about this. Some of the things that have gotten you into trouble were because you asked for them. You blame God for the outcome, but you asked for what was not best for you, and he gave it to you. One, because he loves you, and two, because it's a learning lesson if you'll listen and hopefully not make that mistake again. The chapter actually begins with a description of Saul's physical appearance. And he was head and shoulders not only taller than all the others, but described as literally more handsome than all the others. But internally it says he was insecure. 1 Samuel 9:21 says, Samuel the prophet explains to Saul that he has been chosen to be king over Israel, and this is Saul's reply. And Saul answered and said, am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family, the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then do you speak like this to me? Why are you playing with me? Surely God has not chosen me. Sounds like Gideon. But then we go on to 1 Samuel 10:21 and 22. And Saul, the son of Kish, was chosen. But when they sought him, he could not be found. Therefore, they inquired of the Lord further, has the man Saul come here yet? And the Lord answered, there he is, hiding amongst the equipment. He is so insecure, he is so afraid, he is so disbelieving, he has such little self-esteem that surely they can't be looking for him. Surely he can't be the next king. That's not necessarily the best posture to take on when being required, having your gifts, your calling, your abilities required on in such a capacity. He is to be the first king, and he's hiding behind equipment. So think about this. Though a narcissist may possess what may be commonly stated as strong personality, that perceived strength is often disguised by frail insecurities and a deep need to feel superior and successful. Narcissists often gravitate toward enablers who will pave their way to power, or at least won't get in their way to power. And this is important because one of the things that's happening inside of toxic churches, with toxic leaders, are toxic enablers. Now, here's a word that I need you to get and understand because there's a specific term for this. It's called sycophants. 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 And it is described as people who fawn over someone in a position of power and influence in order to flex, because they are in part attempting to get their own power needs met, to gain power and influence for themselves. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend who corrects out of love and concern, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful because they serve his or her hidden agenda. In other words, friends don't let friends become narcissists. You must scan the landscape and assess what kind of leadership is happening. And are there sycophants, enablers in the midst who are protecting a narcissist and are then, unfortunately, exposing you to the great problems that follow and the great implosion that's soon to come. We all remember the movie A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. And Jack Nicholson plays Colonel Nathan Jessup. He was being interrogated for murder. And Tom Cruise, he was an attorney named David McAfee. And the famous line that Tom Cruise throws out at him, he says, "I want answers. I want the truth." And after needling Jack Nicholson, the colonel, for so long, the colonel gets fed up. His narcissist rise to the top, and he says, "You can't handle the truth." And Scott McKnight writes, because the narcissist's self-image and the church's reputation are so deeply intertwined, rage is a common response to criticism, whether the criticism is direct or merely perceived. And here, Tom Cruise was needling Jack Nicholson's character to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. And he spewed his real truth, what he really felt. And yes, he was in charge. Yes, he was calling the shots. And yes, he gave the order. Because he was going to let it be known that he was in charge. Sometimes rage is kept under wraps, but you can best assure it's seething and brooding, or behind the scenes, passive-aggressive behavior is taking place. But you can be certain that anger is brewing in the heart of a criticized narcissist. It's brewing, and it's going to rear its ugly head. After being disqualified as king because of his disobedience to God's command and being told he was going to be replaced by a better man, King Saul was enraged when the praise of the people revealed that David was better. This young, scrawny boy from the fields of sheep herding is better. And they sang, 1 Samuel 8:7. So the women sang and danced. It's not enough that they are uttering this statement aloud in public, but they're singing and dancing. It's a joyful celebration. They are pleased with this saying. They see no problem with this saying. This is a reality that has even exhibited itself. And instead of Saul being secure in himself and his identity and that God had called him to the position that he was for such a time as this, the rage comes to the surface. It's why some pastors, not all, are in non-denominational churches that afford no accountability and offer maximum control. For the narcissists, it's all about control. So point number one, in a toxic church, you're going to have to assess, is there a narcissist or narcissistic leader? But number two, power through fear. Another tall tale sign, along with the narcissist, in a toxic church environment is power through fear. Power and fear are close companions. Combine this with narcissism, and a toxic culture is sure to form. Once a culture of fear forms in a church, there is almost no turning back, almost no turning back. It is insidious. It is, it's like the Marvel movie with the guy who has the alter ego on the inside, Venom. When it's in there, it's in there. And it's all throughout. And it's black, it's ugly, it's dark. But once a culture of fear forms in a church, it's going to require an act of God to change that. So Saul's son, Jonathan, was a perfect example of what it means not to be beholden to a narcissist or someone with narcissist tendencies, even if they're your own father, even if it's a relative. He was humbled and determined to follow the Lord's leading, even if it cost him his future legacy and kingdom. An Old Testament scholar named Ellen Davis stated it like this: the sages of Israel back in the day teach that those who would be wise must aim not at power, but at goodness. Not at power, but at goodness. Yes, two opposite ends of the spectrum, but not often viewed that way. See, power and goodness are not often close friends. But Jonathan trusted the prophet Samuel, who anointed God's next king. Therefore, then he trusted and befriended David, even though it would cost him the kingdom. Now, Ronald Enroth, an expert on power-based church leaders, states that it is important to recognize that leadership depends on followership. And from a truly Christian perspective, that means cooperation with the leader rather than domination and control by the leader. Cooperation, not domination and control. Is your culture a culture of cooperation, or is your culture a culture of leadership dominating and controlling in decision-making and in the culture itself? The source of legitimate Christian leadership, therefore, lies in entrusted authority, not domineering authority. Just as worship is voluntary, submitting yourself to the Lord, the true Christian leader can legitimately only elicit followership, only elicit it, while the spiritual autocrat, the religious dictator, attempts to compel subordination. Two totally different methods of operating, two totally different dispositions that come with these different methods. Behavior scientists David Owen and Jonathan Davidson coined an important phrase: hubris syndrome. Hubris syndrome. See, the hubris syndrome is a disorder of the possession of power. Get this, a disorder of the possession of power, particularly power which has been associated with overwhelming success. Overwhelming success. Now, the symptoms include a disproportionate concern with image and presentation, contempt for the advice or criticism of others, exaggerated self-belief in what they personally can achieve, loss of contact with reality, restlessness, recklessness, and impulsiveness. And if you read through the story of King Saul, you will see these character traits playing itself out in Saul's leadership that would cost him everything. When leaders get this hubris syndrome is saying when leaders acquire power, power itself becomes an agent that may reduce the leader's capacity for empathy and compassion, especially toward those who are powerless, like women or minorities in church structures. They become, the thing that is giving them power also becomes the thing that diminishes their ability to properly lead, if not properly handled. So here are 8 phases of power through fear culture. This comes from Scott McKnight, theologian. These phases have been seen in all kinds of churches, Catholic and Protestant, small and mega, non-denominational and mainline. Across the gamut, these characteristics have been seen. These are only some of the toxicity and toxic elements and leadership traits. There are others, but these we want to leave with you this evening. The first one we want you to be able to recognize is power and authority are vested in the individual. More often a pastor, most often a man. And the power emerges from a pastor's position, giftedness, persuasiveness, and perceived success. And sycophants are riding the coattails. They are close behind. They are championing everything that the narcissist does because it gives them a perceived level of power and access for themselves. Number two, the pastor's approval becomes the gold standard. Yes, not God's, the pastor's. A false reality emerges, and almost always a perceived connection between the pastor's power and God's approval, as if they're one and the same all the time. It's a sickness. It's a contagious disease, and it can be deadly to the spiritual health of an organization. That's number two. Number three, those approved by the power pastor gain status enhancement. Yeah. This is how this continues to breed and fester. This status inside the church becomes insider status, significant status, and for many, yes, power. Their self-esteem goes up. They feel like they're cool, like they're in the in crowd, and so they just go along. And this is intoxicating for someone who's never had power before. Number four, power cuts with both sides of the blade. They wield the power of approval and of disapproval with impunity. Anybody's head can be on the chopping block. You can be approved one day and under the guillotine the next, because it's all about the leader. Number six, judgment and decisions are rendered behind a wall of secrecy. Yeah. There's only a select few that are on the in crowd. See, the privilege of knowing is what's going on is for the insider's eyes and ears only. And only a select few are going to get in there. And they will definitely be sycophants. Number seven, behind the wall of secrecy lurks a perpetual fear of status degradation. It is intense human experiences like shame, demotion, humiliation. These are powerful tools to keep others in line. It is inevitable in a fear culture. And their presence is a warning that a fear culture actually exists. And then number eight, the final one, and quite easily can be said in one word, but it ends with removal from the circle entirely. One word, banishment. The fear of banishment. These are 8 power through fear characteristics of a toxic church culture. You may have experienced some of this in your church setting. Or you may be a leader and are being warned not to exhibit these traits and become more Christ-like in your approach to leading and in your personal character. Please heed God's warning. We have seen much damage in the universal church. There are names that pop in my head, people that I've admired, people that I've followed, have even gleaned from, learned some things from, but had another side of themselves. And the people who were closest would feel the brunt of this toxic and dysfunctional behavior that only destroys. So the universal church must beware of narcissist and power-hungry leadership. And as we learned last week, the culture of a church organization is formed and nurtured by the behavior of both the leader and the congregation. Never think that you do not have power, and never fall prey to a domineering, egotistical, self-centered style of leadership. We'll learn more about what makes a good church as we continue on in this series. We hope that you will continue to watch with us. We hope this has been helpful. This has been a very interesting study so far. We're learning a lot about ourselves and what not to do, and being more aware is going to allow us to really be the body of Christ. So thank you for joining us this evening. Again, I'm Pastor Sherman Bradley with the Warehouse Church. Thank you for joining the Warehouse. And continue to log in on Sundays at 10 a.m. to our online service. And if you're in the area, we hope to see you at 1310 Race Street, right here in downtown Cincinnati, in the heart of Over the Rhine. So God bless you. We love you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon.